Hello and welcome to the Frequency Matters podcast, episode 2. I'm your host, Kim Fendi. And today we have a very special guest joining us, Dr. Robin Kelly from New Zealand. Hello, Dr. Robin Kelly. How are
Hello,
you today?
fine. 9 o'clock in the morning. Such a
Oh,
perfect time.
wonderful. Excellent. It's 3 o'clock my time on Friday, so you've already had your Friday evening, huh?
Yeah. It was good. It's
Excellent.
good to look forward to. Yeah.
Great. I'm
The
looking
night's
forward to
good
it.
too. Yeah.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to share our conversation today. Just to share a little bit about your background to kick things off. Dr. Robin Kelly is a medical doctor, a medical acupuncturist, a researcher, a multi-award winning author, a TEDx presenter, and a musician from New Zealand. Did I leave anything off?
I'm a dad and granddad.
Oh, see, those are the most important roles, right?
Most important. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'm so excited to have you on our show
Hmm.
today. And so fascinating reading up on all that you've done in your
Hmm.
studies and your research and your work so far in your lifetime. Lots of questions on my end, but I just want to throw it out there kind of open-ended. The theme of this podcast is sound and light frequencies and impact on the human body. So I'd love to just really throw it out to you before we get into anything too specific and see if there's anything that you wanted to share in your line of work and how it relates to that.
Yes. I look, when you suggested that, that got me sort of thinking hard about sound and light in general and how we automatically use this in healing. Starting very basically, how we speak to people, the tone of our voice is very important, and it can be soothing because a lot of our work is balancing, and most of the people we're seeing have a sympathetic overdrive. They're they're stressed, they're anxious, they struggling with time, they're time dependent, and from the start, I've tried to create in my consults, in my medical rooms, and it wasn't always easy, a sense of peace
Mm.
and somehow allow the person to develop the skills that they can do themselves to create that peace. So when I started to do acupuncture, I noticed that whatever I was treating, whether it was a sore neck or sore knee or insomnia, um, people became very relaxed during the treatment and often told me they went home and had a sleep and they had the best night's sleep ever. So I
Awesome.
realized somehow through the combination of all these things, I was creating an environment that was basically the antidote to a lot of problems that we have. And I still try to do that, whether I'm doing acupuncture or not. That is the goal. There's a lot of talk about vagal therapy and switching the body from this sort of sympathetic overdrive to the accepting parasympathetic state. I have to stress we need both. We need to be in, like a pussycat. We need to be in a state of relaxation and purring a lot of the time, so that when we need to act, we act.
Mm.
The yogis and yoga doesn't make us into this passive blob. It actually allows us to sort of keep our energy and restore our energy, so that when we need to act, we need to act. So in that's that. So when it comes to sound and light, absolutely. I mean, just briefly, although I do acupuncture in the traditional way, and I still prefer that, there are ways that you can influence acupuncture points. And I, from the early times, which is now nearly 40 years ago, started to use infrared laser, for instance, which is light you can't see.
Yeah.
And what I found very interesting is that very sensitive people can feel the light. They can feel infrared light from the
Wow.
laser. And some can even track it up the meridians, which are bodies, which we feel now are the body's connective tissue. So that became quite interesting. You can actually feel light. And there are some studies done when you're shining light at different parts of the body, at different parts of the brain, and functional MRIs show up, so there's some science behind this as well. So,
Absolutely.
and so sound, in my practice now, I have classical music playing, because classical music, particularly that of 200 years ago, was the sort of the Valium of the day. It was created, the Baroque music was there to infiltrate the body into a sense of peace. Even at those times, I think there was stress. Obviously, there was lots of stresses. So I have classical music through the rooms, which some people, we don't necessarily always listen to. It's just there, and somehow it's perfusing into the being, that being. And I have become interested in other types of sound healing, and I'm sure you have more experience than me of this, but and there are certain meditative processes that and qigong exercises that I personally use, that employ a focus on chants, and with a focus on different parts of the body. I mean, just for instance, the throat, which is a great one to focus on. There's a sound of which you have to continue for longer, where you can feel it vibrating. You can feel, again, if you put your focus on the heart area, it's slightly different. I mean, these are based on, I think, Buddhist and Tibetan knowledge and wisdom that goes back thousands of years. So they seem to focus so on the heart. You can feel your chest resonating if you do this, and so you create the noise. This one would be and you close your mouth so that everything resonates in there. And you can go around the body onto these points, which which are actually focus points for chakras. I do it in a figure of 8, so it's almost like you're going around in an infinity with a center point on your tummy, basically, and on the hara. So you do a complete workout using vibration. So that's how I do it, and I teach that. It took me a long time to learn, but I try to teach it, like all of us. We try to teach it in a way that people grasp it a little bit earlier than I did anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I have many people coming to me. I'm very impressed by the Tibetan crystal bowls, just the wonderful sound that produces.
That's my instrument of choice.
Oh, okay, all right. I'm just I personally don't use it, but I have got close contacts and friends who do that in sound healing.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So that sound. I mean, just something about sound. When I expect people who are watching this podcast are aware of energy issues, so I can go straight into the fact that there seems to be a tie-up now between the meridians and what science has discovered called the interstitium. And they've discovered this because of modern techniques. You can't cut these things out of the body and study them under a microscope. You have to be clever, use lasers and various other things. But ultimately, we have a network of connective tissue, which has got collagen, but it also has got water in it. So we've got these, that's why the meridians are called the channels, and they've actually, Chinese always talk about the well point and the spring point and the river point and the sea point, so that spreads the body. And we know that low frequency sounds are transmitted by water. And it would seem that, so our body's energetic system may be more aligned to sound than light, but there's of course it's both. It's interesting. I mean, just facts like hippopotami communicate to each other through many miles in a river, even though the river bends. So that's how powerful water is in transmitting low frequencies. And the same with whales. You can
Mm-hmm.
disrupt whales. Unfortunately, we can through our sonar techniques, we can be disruptive to their patterns of migration and things. So to me, that's very important to understand that we have this network through our bodies, and the this network is fractal, and would appear to have little. It's like, so we can talk about rivers, but we can also talk about a tree. So it has little branches and twigs that go into every cell of the body, and they end up in these sort of microtubules and little. If you look at a cell and you see how a cell divides, you've got these fimbria, these what's the word? Anyway, forget the word, but they're actually like tendrils that pull the nuclei apart. Okay, and you can
Yep.
see that happening. I always asked when I was at medical school, like, who's pulling that strings? Why is that happening?
Mm-hmm.
What? Because we still haven't got an answer to that. So we've got a direct line, if you like, into these processes when we are in some way affecting this connective tissue fractal system, like a tree. It's connective, isn't that it not just connects and protects and connects cells in a physical way, it actually spreads out to connecting everything in the body, and also probably beyond, because when you look at the microtubules in the brain, there are theories that these are the foundries where consciousness collapses down into the 3 and 4 dimensional world that we experience, and it's big things. So you can see that when we're tapping into this system, and if people want to Google interstitium, you can see the debate about that, about the interstitium.
Do you have a
And it
definition of how you would define that word?
Interstitium, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Look, it wasn't my word, obviously, but I suppose it's something that istitium, something that it sort of connects. It's like an interstate. It's some part of the body it is connecting everything else. Stitium, inter is like between, so everything is between. The interesting thing is, I wrote in one of my books. It's like we can actually see our other organs as being the organs uh, that actually allow us to connect. So therefore, the primary organ may be our connective tissue, and all our other organs, our heart and our lung, or everything, are making sure that this connective tissue is healthy, and that we connect communally with ourselves, not only just within the body, but with others. And probably, if we extend that into a more cosmic realm, we're connecting to the cosmos, because I'm very interested in inspiration and creativity. And how is it that when we quieten our minds and we do these meditative processes, or we go to a therapist, that it seems to enhance our creativity, makes us feel well because we feel connected with the environment around. We can see ourselves in context, but also it can open our minds to ideas that seem to flow through us. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's my that's my thing of connective tissue. And I think so many of us therapists, and especially in energy medicine, that's what we're dealing with. We're actually dealing with this system, and certainly my understanding of health isn't just an absence of sickness. It's actually something beyond that, when we discover our true creative worth, if you like,
Mm.
and our special role in this world.
Yeah, I love that. I used
Mm.
to teach a painting class, but knowing that I have this sound healing um, piece, I would bring them together, because when
Yeah.
I first started my healing journey, painting was a really important part of it, because it allowed me to kind of step outside of myself and observe the
Mm.
creative process. So I would always set an intention first, and then it was almost as if I was tapping into this frequency of creativity rather than
mm,
it coming through me, because the work
mm,
that I was doing at that time was a very abstract. It was like a pour
mm,
painting.
mm,
So I would just pour the paint in the cup and then literally onto the canvas, and it would create itself. And
mm,
then
mm.
from that, I would see what I got from that. Like there were messages hidden into the painting, and it was just so fascinating to observe that process. And then
Yeah, and
when I started teaching that process, I would bring the sound healing piece into it. We'd get into this meditative state, and I know people feel like, well, I'm not creative, or they have this block where I can't do that. But it's like, this is abstract. We're pouring paint into a cup. Anybody can do that. And
mm,
so we tap into this frequency of creativity, and from there it flows. So I totally get what you're saying, and I love the way you
yeah.
position them.
Yeah, and whether it's art or poetry or whatever, it's interesting. Just do it and create it. I have found with poetry and some of the songs I write, I don't know their meaning at the time, but
Mm-hmm.
somehow I look back at them years later and I get the meaning. It's almost as if this creativity has not been lodged in time. It's come in a timeless place, I could say, could even
That's
come from the future,
that's
because
so
that's what
amazing.
drives us forward. Um, so I'm yeah, I'm exactly that. And people say they're not creative. You get mothers saying, "Well, I'm not creative, but my little son Harry's creative." And I said, "Well, wait a minute, you created Harry." And people's idea is the creativity. You see these amazing saxophone players or whatever, and you just think, I could never do that. But they have just focused and understood that is their special creativity. Doesn't
Hmm.
mean they're great painters, but it doesn't mean so.
Yeah.
The creativity is unique to the person, and everybody is creative. After all, every child is creative, isn't it?
Hmm.
And we have to keep that childlike creativity and that innocence going, because
Yeah.
that's when the children they're focused, and child smiles. Their default mode is having a laugh and smiling,
Hmm.
and yeah, yeah, that's so important. So if we can encourage that, and that's what I do, because if I do any process of something like acupuncture, it doesn't matter what I'm treating, and I say, look, you may feel good after this. I really, then my focus is in teaching how they can achieve this in their lives on a daily basis. And that can include meditation. It can include, they may say, oh, I want to do yoga. Absolutely. I want to do Tai Chi. Absolutely. I want to do martial arts. But they may say, well, look, I may want to paint, and and I say, well, go for it. Don't be confined to what other people are doing. Do what you enjoy and what you seem to get sort of positive feedback from. Um, and yeah, so that to me is my role. It's not sort of during the therapy. The treatment is okay, but we want more than that. We want them to take off, if you
Yeah.
like. And some therapists say, well, that's a bit of a problem for me. I'm a bit dependent on them all coming back. You have to trust the process, because they will tell other people, and
Yeah.
then you develop a practice that is non-codependent, because
Right.
a codependent practice drains one. I find, that or they expect you to do the work.
Right.
So it takes quite a leap to say, look, also once you've done it, they'll say, well, I often say, well, just see how it goes a little bit, for 2 or 3 weeks. Just give me some feedback. And then we have a basis of them taking control. And these are, yeah, to me, that's kept me sustained and interested over the years. So if you're in it for the long run, that to me is
Yeah.
the way to do it. Yeah.
I've seen many healers get either sick or burnt out
Yeah.
because of that. It's as if they're taking on the illness. If they've removed something from somebody, it's like they've absorbed it. And that was
Yeah.
something I was guilty of in my early practice.
We've
And
all
I
done it.
I was like, I can't do this anymore because I've seen this play out in the long run. It's not going to
Yeah.
be good. It's not going to be good. So
No, we
it's
can take on people's pain. We take on their joy as well. But I think to preserve ourselves, this makes sense in every which way, I
yeah.
think.
Yeah.
do that. But it takes a little bit of courage, and financially it's a struggle. But in the long run, if you're in it for the long run, you just have to see that, like the tortoise and the hare.
Yeah.
I'm a
Right.
great fan of the tortoise.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, we can't always be there for people. So I think it's so important to empower the
Faded a
recipient.
bit there. Oh, good, you're back. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's so
yeah.
important to empower the recipient to own their healing. I totally agree with you on that. And
And
I,
then you can spread your practice into groups if you like, which again the group has its own dynamic, and even if you're facilitating it, you're getting something back from that.
yeah.
If you've got time, you can go into speaking, you can do podcasts, you can do
Hmm.
the whole lot, because a one-to-one, whatever, even if we're doing everything right and we're relaxed about it, it's something we can only do a certain amount of the day. I think we can't do a one-to-one. It's energy intensive for us, even though we're relaxed, even though we're doing everything right.
Hmm.
We're human, and by the end of the
Yeah.
day we get tired.
Yeah.
So we have to be very compassionate to ourselves too when we do
Mhm.
this. That's my understanding.
Yeah. My kids are still pretty little. They're going to be 8 and 10 this month. But
Oh, lovely.
when they were very little, I knew I had limited amount of time to get
Yeah,
out and
yeah,
do these things that I felt passionate about, sharing with
yeah.
others, things that were effective in my journey.
Mm,
And when I realized I was actually getting sick from those individual
mm,
sessions, and I would do like festival, and that was
mm,
just like so much energy, and I was absorbing it rather than like
mm, mm.
letting it come through me and giving it back. That's when I made the shift to do groups, because I can stay centered in a large group. You can't be everywhere at
Mm.
once, but I knew if I only have a 1 hour, I can impact 12 people instead of one.
Yeah,
So
so we can mix and match this, and I think that's really important. And
yeah.
if we're in it for the long run, absolutely, this is what we do. And I'll talk about dying for a bit, sorry, because when a person reaches a point where they do feel in control with their energy, which is basically what qigong says, but yoga or whatever, and they are understanding of maybe that consciousness is something that we filter through us, and that comes from somewhere else, um, or they have out of body experiences. Their fear of dying reduces down, and the fear of dying doesn't help us. Okay, we have a love of life, but we shouldn't have such an overwhelming fear of dying, because fear will take out, and that's been a big issue. I mean, there's the fear in the world is big enough anyway. So I've always also found that, because I've been a medical director of a hospice in the 90s, and it was the time where I felt really at peace, because as a doctor, just as a normal doctor, I didn't feel the pressure to save lives, which I think has been overestimated by what a doctor can do. But it was what the public think, you're there, save my life, I've got this, make me better or whatever. And in that process, I noticed that the majority of people who are dying, going through this process, were doing so in peace, because we were creating a peaceful environment, using, a lot of these techniques we're talking about, non-invasive sound and light therapies.
Beautiful.
Um, so that's the other thing. And I think we need to get out of, I'm sure a lot of therapists will be seeing people with advanced cancers and other things. If you release that pressure to save their life, if you like, and focus on enhancing their living, it's a wonderful process. And you'll find the majority of people who are sadly going through this process, there's something that's happening to them. Their consciousness is sort of adapting to their situation, and they carry probably less fear than many of their relatives and friends and people around.
Mm.
So a lot of the time you're saying, well, yeah, they're actually reassuring those who aren't going through the process. So that's another very important lesson, I think, to what I found about healing. Let go of our own personal fears, and somehow we transmit and project those onto others. Now, we're not perfect. I'm not perfect at that at all. And I don't do that perfectly, but I understand the process. I try to do my best in that.
Mm. Yeah,
Mm.
I love that. I've got so many questions for you. I'm trying to think of where should we go?
I haven't
Um,
mentioned light really too much, apart from the light that I use in infrared, but just simply, we know that being in the sunlight, as long as, or even the outside in the shade, is vital to our health. It's like,
mhm,
it's part of who we are. And we know about vitamin D, and we know about SAD. We know that we need light, to many of us, to stop us being depressed or whatever.
mhm,
So um, and you can extend that into an understanding that through Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, who feel that we're energy before we're matter. In other words, matter forms on energy. I write about this, and how matter forms on energy. So you can say we are light and we are frequencies, as we have a light body, if you like. And if you look at the even the religious texts and Christian understanding of a human being enhanced by God, Jesus, who transfigures into a light, where you put your hand through the person. Um, yeah, so very simply, we are also, as well as as well as our body being responsive to sound, we are light.
mhm,
And it's very interesting, because as the positive outcome from a healing process is the person feels a bit lighter.
mm,
Just we talk about light and light. I don't know if I'm sure that's what your clients say. I just feel just a bit lighter, and they can't necessarily put their finger on it.
yeah,
Um, and all this has to be done with a light heart. We can be very sort of tense, and
serious.
doctors tend to say, if they give you bad news, that they're afraid. I'm afraid you have this condition.
Oh.
Well, you don't want to hear they're afraid, basically, because that's don't tell me you're afraid.
You're
What are
afraid,
you
yeah,
afraid of?
yeah.
Does that mean I have to be afraid? So these things are best done, uh, obviously focused, obviously done with a lot of wisdom and study, but with a light heart. And you can be light-hearted, and humor is terribly important in that. um, I find
Yeah.
that's good, and it gets you through the day as well, because you know you want that lovely interaction, don't you? That light-hearted interaction. So light and light, everything is light. Okay,
Yeah.
you want to be, yeah.
Yeah. I definitely feel that like when I work hard to release a fear or
Mm.
reprogram my brain to
Mm.
let go of old beliefs, that once I kind of have achieved that new state, I definitely feel lighter. It's
Mm.
less density, less
Mm.
heaviness, just like weighing on you. So I can
Mm.
totally relate to that.
I don't know if I've just got another thought about music, because as you know, a slow song is a song that actually has a resting heartbeat, or less. Okay. And a fast song, the beat is higher than our heart rate. Now, in general, we're in the business of soothing, I think, more than exciting. But there's a role, of course. You dance, and you want the rhythm, you want the hard rock, you want all that. That also is freeing. We need that balance. We need the yang
Mhm.
with the yin.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know about you, but I need both of those. I need and if you're planning a concert or whatever, then you want to, or an album, you want to mix those two up. You want the yin and the yang. So in life, we want excitement. There's nothing wrong in that.
Mhm.
It's putting it into context. We need both.
Yeah.
The problem is that most people, their stresses are because there's too much busyness going on in the body, too much busyness in their minds, too much fear, too much self-criticism, too much past trauma that is hidden somewhere. Yeah. So the heartbeat of the body, yes, everything that's a song that matches the resting heartbeat, 1 beat a second or whatever, is a slow love song because it's what the heart's doing. But it doesn't mean, and then you increase it till you get excitement, and that's just as good, but everything needs to be in balance. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love that you've also have what, 6 albums out there?
Yeah.
That's
Just
such a wonderful conglomerate of very different things that you've done in your life.
it's interesting because I've both of my books won Science Book of the Year a few years ago. But the scientists and the people that I talk to who seem to have a grasp on what we're saying, and they come from different angles, and none of us is right about everything. Absolutely not. They also seem to have another interest. They may be painters, they may be musicians. Einstein was a very good violinist, for instance. So it would seem to be the people who get it are also interested in art. And it's really my focus and my concern about doctors, because I'm a regular doctor too. I work in student health, and I have to sit down and I do those sessions. But it's to realize that, I don't know, it worries me that the doctors are sort of have to go through this sort of very forced left brain control, if you like, which is just guaranteed to burn them out. You need to balance, and it needs to be allowed, in school, in medical school, or whatever. In fact, it needs to be encouraged, this side of things. We're a long way from it. Some places are better than others, but we're a long way from that.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very big issue in my country.
Yeah.
Not just with the medical field, but in the elementary schools. And I mean, there's one way to learn. I feel like we're coming, the administration is coming around and trying to adapt to the different learning styles. But to me, it's a whole brain approach, and not everybody's going to learn the same way. And it's important to really exercise those muscles that are on the other side. So we can't just try to fit everybody into these little boxes.
No, and it worries me because because so many students now are going on to therapy for ADHD, the attention deficit disorder. And it does concern me. They do get the medications seem to help them. But I have some disquiet about this, because I think they look back and say, well, look, I don't concentrate well enough, and I've had this, and now it's all changed. I think the system is the problem. I don't think their brains are deficient in these things which are stimulants. I don't think that's the case. I think that our system has to change, and that we have to identify people's different learning early on, but not put them on drugs all their lives. I mean, that worries me.
Yeah.
It worries me. And yet they will, and they feel better on them. So, you can't deny that. But the long term, I'm not happy about.
Great. You wrote a book called, 2 books.
Well, I went in 3, but
3 books.
I know the 2. Yeah.
Okay. So the 2 books that I did some research on was the Human Hologram, Living Your Life in Harmony with the Unified Field. And then the other book was The Human Antenna.
Yeah.
Both super fascinating concepts. Definitely not mainstream ideas and concepts. I'm curious, what in your research and studies have led you to understanding the world in these ways?
Gosh. I suppose there's a lot. I wrote the first book I wrote was something called Healing Ways, which basically I haven't got on Amazon or whatever. It was published by Penguin, so it was a mainstream book. And that book I wrote after doing about 18 or 20 years or so of doing acupuncture, and it was my understanding of Chinese medicine, and how that seemed to be helpful, because as a doctor, a mainstream doctor, I've had to keep up with all my mainstream doctor stuff. We have to do ongoing academic studies and all that. But the reaction I was getting from people was, look, Robin, this is nonsense. This is nothing to do with science. This is nothing to do with getting people better. So I heard that for so long, I thought, oh, well, I'll write a book about it to say my point of view on that. And it followed my understanding of what the Chinese called the Zhang Fu, which was the link between the organ systems and the Chinese organ systems, which are far, not just the organ, but sort of energetically expressed in the organ. And, other issues, people's strengths and weaknesses and worry. And, for instance, the Chinese will say overthinking damages the spleen. Now, their spleen is, I'll just turn that off. So in other words, that's worry. Does that worry affect our immune system? Of course it does. So that's just one example of what I was saying. No, let's not diss the Chinese people who have observed this over thousands of years, because it's just human observation. And that's what we're basing it on. Okay, so that was that one to get that. Now, then the human antenna, which got here, it was based on when I started to look at the chakras, and they studied some Vedic history, and found that actually this was easier for people to understand, because they were zones of the body which people come in with their problems, a backache or a indigestion or whatever, or a problem with their throat. And we could extend the conversation into what was happening in their lives. For instance, where if they had a problem with their thyroid, or problems in their shoulders, where they're being listened to, if they had a problem in their stomach, where they trapped between, if they were in a sales job, where they trapped between the customers on one side and the management on the other. And, drug companies have done wonders for this, because they've omeprazole and these other drugs are the biggest selling drugs for people who feel trapped. Low backache, is there something to do with insecurity? Is there some issues? Financial insecurities. So you could open the door to discussing this with people, that actually gave them insights into some meaning behind their issue, rather than just say, well, let's give this drug to stop it. Let's take it. So that's what I say. And also, the understanding that our consciousness grows through our lives as we get older. We should become wiser. Not necessarily the case, but we should become wiser. And that we go through cycles, and that we needed to be challenged in certain parts in our lives to grow, and that can be through illnesses or other situations. And, really the focus is, when does the heart open? When does the heart open? When the heart opens, where these sort of interpersonal conflicts, which are more to do with the third chakra, become less important, because, the heart opens, and we're not in such a competitive environment. We are actually in a compassionate, loving environment where self-compassion is important. When that opens, our vocation may come through. And when our vocation comes through, we may get more insights, and there may ultimately more connection. And the understanding that this happens in cycles. You can say that it can be a cycle that ends when we're 28 or 30. And then if we have children, we relearn that cycle by trying to provide for those children some of the pressures that we had as children. But their children teach us, okay? And then it happens as grandchildren as well. So we're learned by these experiences as we try to learn about ourselves. Our children teach us so much. So those were the sort of concepts I was wanting to grasp. Now, the human antenna is, once we become more balanced, then are we an antenna for consciousness? Are we like, is this something that as our heart opens, that we become receivers of consciousness? And in fact, is that our job? Is that our job In other words, to somehow receive this consciousness and through our actions in this life, raise the consciousness, if you like.
I
Because
like.
there's a reason we're in this state. This is no way dissing our physical state, but we're here to do stuff. We've got legs.
Mm-hmm.
We have, we can hug. We need to do stuff, and it need necessarily to be sort of aligned in the right way with virtues, values, and various other things. So that was the human antenna, that as this consciousness grows, we do realize that we are connected to something greater, maybe as Tom Campbell said, a larger consciousness system. Some would say depends whatever, understanding one has. We can talk about God, we can talk whatever. I think ultimately we're talking about the same thing, connections to something greater, an implicate order, something else that's behind our daily routines. There's something else that becomes apparent to us. So that was the human antenna. And also, my work as an acupuncturist, you stick pins into people so they become more antenna-like. You're putting little antennas in them, and so they become more connected. I'm sure this is how it works. When I have a little process where I use very gentle techniques, and I will touch one maybe needle, or even without the needle, one point and another point, maybe on the foot, and I become a conduit, and we become joint antennae. And we have to sort of release too many thoughts, but it's very interesting because you get a feeling, a lightness sometimes that comes through you, which is very difficult to describe, but it's there, and they do as well. And if you have this understanding that something's coming through you, it doesn't drain you. It doesn't sort of coming from a place that can be exhausted, if you like. It's coming from an inexhaustible free energies place, and so there are little exercises in the book of how this can happen. Look, it happens when we hold hands. It happens when we touch people. It's so important that we remember this, particularly with this sort of tech revolution where we are in danger of letting the machines do all our thinking and working for us. We have to be just in awe of what we can do as humans.
That's fascinating. I've been on part of my journey is definitely what separates us as humans from other animals is that ability to grow, use tools, connect with others. And I don't think that's by accident. So what can we do with those gifts, and how can we maximize that while we're here on Earth? So it's so fascinating to think about.
Yeah, and we have a conscience, and so we have something drives us to how can we be better, whether we're an elite athlete or a writer or just anything. At the end of the day, we just think, we have reflect on that. We can self-respect or self-aware. I mean, people will say that, the difference between us and a giraffe is a giraffe doesn't go to bed at night, doesn't go to bed or whatever. I don't know how they sleep. But thinking, how can I be a better giraffe tomorrow? It's just being a giraffe. No, it may do. I don't know. But that's the difference, is our self-reflection. And I do have a lot of concerns about technology. I both love it because I love doing this, and nothing, and even my recording is made a lot easier. But certain things concern me. There's Chat GPT, you probably know this, which you ask the computer to write a story or to create a song, and it sort of does, or write an essay. But our creativity, our art, as you say, you aren't just putting the stuff on the paper, the songs. There's an imperfection in us that actually touches us. Great art, sure, the techniques have to be pretty good and perfect, but there's more to that. It's actually carrying our story and our humanity, which
Mm-hmm.
isn't perfect. This whole idea.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah,
and we have to put this into perspective. We have to put our yeah the machines into perspective, and uh, not not let them dictate the terms. I've just this last month started. There's a local market that started up because I'm really focused on community. That I think that we've got the politicians and the bureaucrats telling us all sorts of things. Um, and I believe the strength of a human being is in community. So I started this stall called Albany, which is where I live, creative. And the idea is that everybody can come in for 10 minutes. They sign up on a whiteboard and do whatever they like. They can sing or dance or juggle or tell a story, um, do a magic trick, whatever. Uh, and and also the stall holders who are creating whatever they are, the candles, the quilts, the artwork, whatever, can come for 5 or 10 minutes and discuss how what drives their creativity, what it is that they're. Now, the idea is also to support the stall holders, but also to somehow give inspiration to other people passing.
Mm-hmm.
New Zealanders are very closed in some ways. They don't come forward. They're probably equivalent to Canadians, compared with the States, and we compare with Australians who do tend to come forward somewhat. So it's a bit of it'll be a slow process, but hopefully that's really what I'm after. I feel so important, and at the back of it, I am concerned that the young have their creativity somehow muddied by the screens in front of them. They're selling them something, aren't they? They're not necessarily encouraging. You can use this technology to, like we're trying to do now,
Mm-hmm.
to encourage creativity, but I also think the community needs to support this, and that's
Mm-hmm.
our way. Rather than battling the machines,
Yeah.
we are, it's the magic of the body that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be explored.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. I think that you touched on the fact that the community needs to support it because I think as individuals, we carry so much fear in our own self-expression that we
Mm.
haven't really explored independently. So it really takes an audience sometimes and this courageous attitude
Mm.
to really see what's there, and it's this really scary and vulnerable place to be. So you really need people, a community that's really open and willing and loving to hold that space for whatever comes through.
And non-judgmental. It's
Yes.
not a talent show like on the TV,
Yes,
Britain's Got
exactly.
Talent and everything, because it's different from that, and we have to have an environment of support.
Hmm.
There's no right or wrong when it comes to this.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's yeah. Uh, yes.
beautiful.
Have you another question? Because I could go off on tangents, I'm
Yeah, yeah.
afraid.
So I know we could probably
Yeah,
continue this a whole conversation for
yeah,
hours on end, and maybe I'd love to have you back
yeah.
sometime.
Maybe that's we're coming to a natural
But
point of
yes, but I
yeah,
do have two questions
yeah.
that come to mind is kind of to wrap up. First of all, I'm curious, what kind of roadblocks have you come across in your career, and knowing that what you're doing is really different from mainstream, bridging Eastern and Western philosophies,
Yeah.
especially here in the States. How does that translate in New Zealand, and what's your experience been like?
Yeah, how can me as a doctor, because I carry a function as a doctor and I do all this, has there been pressure on me? Um, I think mostly it's been I'm doing nothing rather than something if I'm not prescribing a drug. But I've also they've been quite grateful to send other doctors send me what they call the difficult problems to me.
Oh.
Okay. So I've been sort of supportive of them in some ways. I see the greatest, well, what I do mostly is listen, and you listen without judgment, um, with an open heart, and you often find the solutions come through that listening to the person, especially if they start saying, look, I've never said anything before, it's probably not important, and then gosh, something's going to come that's really important. Okay. So and also interesting about acupuncture, it was sort of accepted in the 70s and 80s because there seemed to be some chemical connection, endorphins happen. So sort of it was accepted by the medical profession as something that could fit into their paradigm. Having said that, I'm taking it out of that paradigm to a certain extent and going into holographic science, which we can talk about at another time, because that was my next book about.
Yes, please.
We're
I'd love
not
to.
just
Yeah.
we're not just receivers, we're actually holographic representations of the universe. Anyway, so that's just another story. So the roadblocks have been you learn less money doing this because you have to spend longer with people, and we have a system that I think is pretty broken, based on very quick consultations and assumptions about the person that's coming, and then treating with protocols which are designed for populations but not for the individual. So you have to get into yourself a situation. I work here at home. My wife is a nurse, and we work in partnership in our own home, and we've had our home designed so that we have this connection, this system where I don't have a lot of distractions, and I can and people can feel they're coming into your home. They're very respectful of that, even though we have a side entrance, it's not into our living area. I found they're very respectful, but also somehow it engenders trust, because although we have a computer system, I don't have a computer in my room. So it stays in the room, if you like. And I have real concerns that in medicine, people don't trust the doctor necessarily, who's looking at the computer, tapping everything down. They may trust the doctor, but they don't know where that information's going.
Yeah.
And I'm now in a situation where people are saying, Robin, you seem to be quite happy with what you're doing, and they're pretty miserable. What is it? So without that, probably by just enjoying what I'm doing, that's my best message. Have there been, look, I haven't had I haven't taken much interest in people that have been overcritical. They are critical. Basically, the doctors who do a lot of supplement stuff get hit quite a bit here. And a lot of them have suffered, and they've had their licenses taken away or threatened. I don't use a lot of machinery. I keep it very simple. So they're doctors who go into energetic medicine and use a lot of machines are criticized, mostly coming from a misunderstanding from our profession about that. So I've kept it very simple, and that's how I've done it. And I've just created longer time in my consultations for things to happen, and that takes the pressure off me. So yeah, it's a fine line sometimes, though. It's a fine line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
One more question. Well, I'm sorry. There's, I think, maybe two.
Okay. That's
Um,
great.
what drives you in this work, in your career, in your passions?
I think you have to balance them all out. There's like, unless I sing every day or do some music or listen to some music, I probably wouldn't be so effective as a doctor. So it's a matter of mixing this, and it's pleasant because I think the situation I have in my own practice is I don't have the pressure of a full waiting room, because we are spending time with people, and usually it's a very pleasant time that we spend together. So that enriches me. I do a day at the university where I'm supposed to see people I've never seen before, often from different cultures, in quarter of an hour and come to a conclusion. And most of the time, the concern is that there is a huge issue of anxiety and depression in young people. And although we have counselors, I find compromise in that situation. I feel that I need to get to the roots of this. I need to spend longer. I think the system is broken. I personally feel that it's not sustainable for you to go to a doctor who is pressured to come up with solutions in 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour. And I'd have to say, people sometimes come with 12 problems. And they sometimes don't have a concept of, they want a pill for everything still. And they're not in my practice, but out there they do still. And there's a lot of work to be done. And I think we've been at fault there as doctors. We've put ourselves in this situation. And, people's problems are incredibly complex. And we need basically to understand the complexity, but then make it very simple. Find out what can we do that's very simple. Do they need to be outside for 10 minutes a day getting light? Do they need to listen to some music? Do they need to, and you have to establish a bond with the person to impart that sort of information, I think. And the system is under tremendous pressure. I do think that the whole medical system is under great pressure. And doctors, I don't know, you don't see them very happy, except the rich ones.
Hopefully.
And they're happy of a certain way. And they're happy because they can do other things, I think.
Yeah. Probably far from the reason that they got into the practice in the first place, though.
I know. Yeah. It's a bit, they've become dispirited.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking to see is in teachers as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My grandmother opened the first Montessori school in London in 1919 after the war, and trained under Professor Maria Montessori. And basically, the Montessori principle is exactly as we've said. It's to encourage the uniqueness and creativity of each individual soul, not just as a child, but they grow through life. They appreciate that. Yeah.
I love that. So to wrap up, the name of the podcast, the name of my business is called Frequency Matters.
Yes.
What does that mean to you? I'm just curious. Does frequency matter?
Yes, it does. I think harmony matters. I think we need to harmonize with each other. We need to tune in to others. We need to tune in to ourselves. We need to tune into our to the greater consciousness. It's, I say up there, it isn't. It's just down there as well. It's everywhere. So it's, to me, it's about resonance and harmony. But also, if you write a song, there's usually a discord somewhere in it. So in other words, we're talking about, if everything is harmonious, you can throw in something that reminds people that you're human too. So it is about resonance, but it's also, look, it's about energy. People who are involved in energy medicine understand that we're fundamentally energetic, some would say spiritual conscious beings, and that's where we're at. And therefore there's nothing more sustaining than being harmonizing on the same frequency of somebody as somebody else. I think it goes beyond frequencies too. Consciousness, we don't know. We have to be very humble and to know that we're tapping into something, which in maybe the next few hundred years will become, if we survive, and we have to tap into it to survive,
Mm-hmm.
that we'll understand more. But it never stops us exploring, because it's the unknown that produces wonder in us, doesn't it? It's like you never stop wondering about things. That's
Very
it.
true. Very true.
Yeah.
Thank you. So there was one thing that you said that was well, lots of things were very fascinating, but that I wondered if you have time, we can end this portion of the podcast and go to an exclusive content. Would you
Okay.
be able and willing, and do you have the time to share the
Yeah.
infinity chant?
Oh,
I'd love.
okay.
Is that
Right.
something
So,
you'd be open to, or is there just something
well,
different you'd like
I've
to share?
started it, haven't I? Okay. Given that I suppose I learnt this over a week of quite an intensive retreat, so I
Oh
can only
wow.
give, um, but I can give you an outline, I think,
Okay.
of what this is. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Um,
This concludes this portion of our podcast, episode 2 interview with Dr. Robin Kelly. Thank you so much for listening today. If you would like to listen in on the exclusive content where Dr. Kelly shares a bit of an overview of the infinity chant that he discussed with me on this show, please be sure to subscribe to my Patreon page at patreon.com/frequency matters. I plan on having Dr. Kelly back in the future. There's so much fascinating content to continue, and I'd love to take any questions from you. So please message me. You can reach me on facebook.com/frequency matters, or also message me through youtube.com/frequency matters. Thank you again. Have a blessed and beautiful day.